Hello, my name is Samuel Backus, and I'm going to be doing a short presentation on folk music and anti-war sentiments and protests during the mid to late 1960s. First, we need some background information on the Vietnam War and the protests against it. The conflict originally started as a colonial war between the native Vietnamese and the French colonial government. When the French were eventually routed, American influence increased. American politicians feared the spread of communism, as dictated through the domino theory, the idea that if one nation becomes communist, then surrounding nations will fall as well. So, the US government sent millions of dollars in equipment and support to the democratic Southern Vietnamese, based out of Saigon, to defeat the communist Northern Vietnamese out of Hanoi. Eventually, this conflict became an outright proxy war, with the West supporting South Vietnam, and the USSR and China supporting the North. Starting in 1961, hundreds of thousands of American youth would be sent to fight. Hundreds of thousands would be injured, and tens of thousands would die. At home, opinions on the war tanked, as the war was not as easily won as American propaganda had made it out to seem. Additionally, the many deaths, vast economic spending, and questionable morality of the war caused the public to widely oppose it. Student-led protests proliferated, and their soundtracks were largely provided by folk artists who shared anti-war sentiments. Some of the big names in folk music at the time include Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, Phil Ochs, Donovan, and many others. Each are renowned for their poetic and powerful lyrics addressing social issues, including the war in Vietnam, the civil rights movements, and other issues of the time. Considered the queen of folk, Joan Baez is one of the most influential artists of the time. She was also the reason for Bob Dylan's meteoric rise. First of all, she considered herself a politician, and a musician only second. She was highly active in spurning the Vietnam War and fought for the civil rights movement, which led to her being arrested multiple times for her protesting. In her music, her stunning soprano voice carried her message in songs such as We Shall Overcome, which became verifiable anthems for protesters. If Joan Baez is the queen of folk, then Bob Dylan was certainly the king of folk. He wrote on social issues and is famous for his poetic lyrics. He became the icon of the folk revival, and numerous artists followed his example. He was, however, a divisive figure, what with his move to electrical instrumentation and his more commercialized songs, such as Like a Rolling Stone. Both issues drew the ire of the orthodox folk community. However, songs such as Blowing in the Wind and The Times They Are a-Changin' are protest classics that demonstrate his commitment to social justice movements. An often forgotten and underrated folk musician of the 60s, Phil Ochs was a wonderful lyricist with a fine touch for details stemming from his schooling as a reporter. He took bold risks and had no censure on himself, as he produced songs such as I Ain't Marchin' Anymore and other staunch anti-war pieces that were almost never played on the radio. He took this as a sign of success, knowing his message was powerful enough that mainstream media could not play his music. At first considered a carbon copy of Dylan, Donovan grew into yet another famous pop folk artist of the 60s. His simple, optimistic, and gentle nature shows through in his music, that still clearly challenges the legitimacy of war and violence in songs such as Ballad of a Crystal Man and The War Drags On. He was inspired by many of the big artists of the time, including Dylan, Baez, and Guthrie. Donovan also included unorthodox elements into his folk music, including jazz elements and even a string section at times. Folk music was incredibly important in the volatile 1960s, when this music became the soundtrack for a whole generation of people upset by the injustices of the times. The civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and others expressed themselves through this music. So, looking to today, what kinds of contemporary artists utilize folk elements or at least use their lyrics to address social issues? And is published music a valid way to express political grief and affect change? Well, I hope you can take something away from these questions and from the rest of this presentation, and I hope you've learned something. Thank you very much. Bye.